So the Homestuck epilogues are out, and they kinda suck. But also that was maybe the point? Hello everybody, welcome back to the saddle. Have you missed being here, in the violent thrall of Andrew Hussey's blissfully mind-numbing imagination? Well, if the fan reception I've been seeing to these puppies is anything to go by, a lot of you are none too thrilled about this.
Go crazy! Go stupid!
And I hear you, I feel you. Let's you and me direct our combined fury at the notion that we really expected something simple, happy, and comprehensible from the guy who wrote HOMESTUCK. But after we've all got our horns out of a tizzy and our anger buckets good and dumped, let's all take a breath, take a couple steps back, and think about why we feel this way. It's an easy sell to say it's because the epilogues suck and leave it at that, isn't it? Well, sure, it'd be a pretty effortless insinuation to make. No matter the route you choose, things are almost uncharacteristically hostile, shallow, or even just plain volatile compared to the Homestuck of old we so dearly clung to. But if Homestuck's ending has taught me anything, it's that fan reception is beholden to the ever-creeping metamorphosis of retrospect, and that the same things I think about something hours, days, weeks, or even years into the past may not be what I always think. And this can be no greater exemplified than with that of the Homestuck epilogues themselves, because to be honest, for the most part, coming out of these, I hated it. But was unsure if I truly loathed it or felt some sort of begrudgment simply because it's not what I thought I wanted. The answer, it turns out, is something resembling a weird mishmash of both answers, and is the subject I want to dive into in today's video. On my last Homestuck essay, I suggested that Homestuck, the comic, is a story about accepting the end, but also realizing that every ending marks a new beginning. For a while, I made the mistake of carrying this through line into my burgeoning read of the epilogues proper. This was not what I should have done, though, because as it turns out, I don't think we were meant to connect these two, at least not fundamentally. On the Homestuck website, if you visit the log page, Homestuck and its epilogue are split into two distinct adventure logs. The other adventure logs on the site are, of course, Jailbreak, Bard Quest, Problem Sleuth, and Sweetbro and Hella Jeff. This is worth noting because if you notice, all of these things have something in common. They're separate narratives, but your understanding of one may be supplemented in some respect if you have knowledge of the others. Homestuck, for example, contains many direct references both to Problem Sleuth and Jailbreak, and Sweetbro and Hella Jeff itself is a branching product born from within a joke within Homestuck. This isn't to say that the Homestuck epilogue is a completely different narrative in such a stark manner, however. It's not like Problem Sleuth when compared to Homestuck, because on the surface, a lot of its elements greatly resemble Homestuck proper, and act upon our knowledge of Homestuck's narrative and characters. What this is meant to symbolize, though, is an immediate dissonance between the world of the epilogue and the world of Homestuck itself. The log's description even describes the epilogues as tales of dubious authenticity, which is explored in even greater extent in the story's own content. But now we're starting to get into spoiler territory, so trust me, if you don't want to get spoiled rotten for these epilogues, I'm warning you now that I'm about to do so from here on out. This isn't like the Homestuck video where it was somewhat accessible to Homestuck virgins because of its very sweeping and general retrospective nature. This is a video made fully assuming you are either familiar with the details or you don't care if they get spoiled for you. I also want to disclaim for future reference that this is all just my interpretation of the provided material. I'm not an authority on the authenticity or validity of my reading, and I present my analysis to you simply as that, my analysis. You've been warned. So like I said, Homestuck was a story about being okay with the end and how each ending marks a new beginning, but we've already established that this story is now somewhat of a separate entity from Homestuck proper, even if it borrows from our understanding of Homestuck to set the stage. So then, if that's the case, what are the Homestuck epilogues about? What do they offer in terms of structure or message? Well, if you ask me, I think in a loose sense you could say that the Homestuck epilogues are about the death of the author. And when I say this, I mean it in more ways than just one, but to try and dive into all those meanings now would be heavily jumping the gun, so pulling back, let's start by saying that while it's not the only provided example of author death I'm citing for this core message, it does still very much have to do with the death of the author, referring to a 1967 essay by French literary critic and theorist Roland Barthes. Barth's essay argues against traditional literary criticism's tendency to place an irremovable stock in the intentions and biographical context of an author when stacked against the interpretation of the text. Barths argues instead that writing and creator are unrelated, that the author does not serve as the basis for distilling meaning from the work at hand. Readers must thus separate a literary work from its creator in order to, in essence, liberate the text from interpretive tyranny, with each piece of writing containing multiple layers and meanings. Barths draws an analogy between text and textiles, declaring that a text is a tissue of quotations drawn from the innumerable centers of culture, rather from one individual experience. The essential meaning of a work depends on the impressions of the reader rather than the passions or tastes of the writer, which puts more emphasis on the destination of a text, its audience, than on that of its origin, its creator. In essence, this enables the text to be read in many different ways by many different people, and portrayed in a variety of manners by those people for variable reasons. In essence, this removes the notion that the author's desire or reading of a text means anything more than the readership's own. We'll come back to this later, so keep it in the back of your head for now. The epilogue begins with a lengthy content warning section reminiscent of a page on Archive of Our Own, a widely used fanfiction website, already cluing us in that this will be far from what we're used to as far as Homestuck fare goes. Furthermore, upon beginning the prologue, we can spot one of the very notable differences right off the bat. The entirety of the epilogues is prose, written as if it were a novel rather than a comic. No cartoon panels, no wacky music. We're stared back at for the duration of our read by sobering walls of text. If this wasn't already enough to set the tone, the prologue itself is sure to do so. We once again join John Egbert on April 13th, his now 23rd birthday and 10 years after he first began his journey. He catches wind of some urgent text from Rose Lalonde and calls to find out she's suffering from debilitating, overwhelming visions and migraines, and she asks him to visit her apartment. Arriving promptly, John finds that Rose is taking a large number of pills to manage her condition, though she's quick to deny falling back into substance abuse. She tells John that the Green Sun was destroyed by a black hole, presumably the one created by alternate Calliope in S-Act 7. This means that Jade Harley no longer has her first Guardian powers, and Rose asks John to use his retcon powers, return to Canon, and defeat Lord English. Now, this might already be throwing you for a loop. Wait, return to Canon? Rose explains that there are 3 types of canon that events can fall into. The first is inside canon, which would refer to events that took place during Homestuck proper, before the heroes entered Universe C, which is the universe they created at the end of the game. Inside canon is held to be absolutely true. The second is outside canon, where Universe C exists, which is conditionally true. The third is non-canon, which is absolutely untrue. While our heroes currently reside outside of canon, there are still essential events inside canon that need to occur, like Lord English's defeat, for Earthsea to maintain its conditional truth and continue existing. If those events do not happen, Earthsea will lose its legitimacy and undergo dissipation, a process of forgetting that will cause the universe itself to become conceptually unraveled. John, by extension, must go back and load the Juju, so it can be used against English, but he won't be receiving any help from his friends along the way. The Earthsea kids lost their ability to influence canon when they entered the Victory Door. Instead, John must seek out younger and more relevant versions of the kids from a dysfunctional moment in their adventure. Rose gives him a note with instructions to follow, similarly to the set of instructions he received from Terezi around the events of the first retcon, and retires to her bedroom. Meanwhile, in the Carapace Kingdom, Roxy and Calliope invite John over for a picnic. He and Roxy discuss how the Lalonde's relationship has become somewhat distant since Rose married Kanaya, and subconsciously John can't help but wonder if Roxy and Calliope's ambiguously romantic relationship confirms his suspicion that he's waited far too long to put any kind of romantic move on Roxy. Calliope brings up John's mission, stating that he's free to choose whether or not he'll go. John struggles with making a decision, becoming overwhelmed with regret for the years he wasted doing nothing on Earthsea, and drifting further from the people he cares about. Noticing his nervousness, Calliope offers him a simple choice between 2 lunch options: meat or candy. Predictably, this then splits into 2 separate pathways indicated by each choice, with meat representing an altogether more canon path where John chooses to fight Lord English, and candy representing a non-canon path where John chooses not to fight Lord English. Keep in mind, though, that as a whole, Universe C has conditional truth, and the story itself refers to its status of authenticity as dubious. This is especially interesting to note, considering that some actions that happen in the candy path influence the events of the meat path and vice versa. So in some manner we can presume both timelines exist, which is easy enough to do considering that Homestuck is notorious for having all sorts of varying and variable timelines. Let's start by summarizing the key footnotes of the Candy Path. John decides to not go fight Lord English and instead stay behind, making an effort to solidify his relationships. Predictably, this goes a bit off the rails, however, as the decision to let Gamzee out of the fridge and redeem himself snowballs into an ensuing cluster of increasingly strange and disturbing events. Jane Crocker, who was initially interested in running for president of Earthsea, has given up her campaign path after her running mate Dirk Strider suddenly and without warning drops all ambitions for a campaign at all. In the process, however, she begins an unhealthy relationship with Jake English and abuses him, as well as doubling down on her burgeoning xenophobia towards trolls in an ensuing war led from the opposing side by Karkat Vantis. In this path of the story, Dirk commits suicide to escape the non-canonicity of the path, and in doing so unlocks a vague and mysterious power beyond God tier referred to as the Ultimate Self. The Ultimate Self presumably allows a person to inherit all of the memories and experiences of their alternate universe selves, including offshoot timelines and derivatives of their person. Oh, also, Dave meets Obama, who is revealed to be a Hope player, who played a secret session of Sburban. Anyway, over in the Meat Path, John goes to fight Lord English and ends up knocking him into the black hole by the combined efforts of the recruited kids he finds in the Game Over timeline, and Dave Pettisprite squared. During the scuffle, however, one of English's teeth is lodged inside of John and, over time, slowly poisons him. He meets up with Terezi circling the black hole looking for Vrska, and the two of them get intimate before deciding to try heading back to Earthsea. By the time they arrive, though, the poison takes full effect, killing John as Terezi mourns him, hiding the news from the others by captulogging him and leaving. During all of this, Jane runs for president, helped by Dirk, and Dave tries to stage a counter-movement with Karkat as running man because of Jane's xenophobic policies on troll reproduction, as well as her apparent desire to simply repeat what she knows of economic policy, something Dave's not keen on as a vocal critic of the capitalist society of their previous world. Both parties vie for political favor with the public by trying to acquire the public approval of Jake, who works as a television idol, adored by all of the kingdoms alike. You might be wondering to yourself already, isn't this all just a little bit miserable? Things are really getting out of hand for what we expected to be a happy epilogue simply trying to tie up loose ends. Then we get the real kicker. Dirk Strider in the Meat timeline is revealed to have inherited the powers of Ultimate Self given to him by Candy Dirk's suicide. In attaining his Ultimate Self, he merges consciousness with all of his alternate timeline selves, as well as the splinters of himself that exist within them. This means effectively Dirk is now combined with not only his worst neuroses from other timelines, but those of the coldest stone abusive brother of Dave from the pre-Scratch universe, the autoresponder, or HAL, and by extension Doc Scratch and a portion of Lord English himself. Not only does this break down Dirk's inhibitions about his most truly nasty capabilities, but it also gives him the powerful awareness of his place within the narrative, and allows him to overtake it, puppeteering the narrative structure, controlling people's thoughts and actions and emotions simply by writing it as such. He vies for control over the narrative with the alternate Calliope, mirroring the struggle she had already prevailed in over her brother Caliborn and their predomination. So whoa. Dirk is the villain? Yes, indeed, and surprisingly enough, I've seen a lot of people accuse this move as being out of character for Dirk, but is it really? The conditions of an Ultimate Self transition notwithstanding, Dirk Strider hasn't exactly been known to be a not controlling person. Dirk has always been the type of person to teach people lessons for the sake of what he believes to be the benefit of their personal development, such as when he insists that Jake should fight Brobot to secure a supply of uranium as a consequence of having wasted his own. In addition, Dirk harbors a lot of self-hatred, which is only compounded upon contending with his alternate selves. His relationship with Jake was described as overbearing, and though Jake shares a portion of blame for being avoidant and conversing with Dirk about this, the point stands. Dirk ascending to his ultimate self effectively destroyed the barriers between him and his splinters, causing them to reintegrate into the Ulta-Dirk you see here, which incidentally is what I'm going to refer to Meat Timeline Dirk as from now on for simplicity's sake. Dirk has always been someone who shows a very clear need to be important and relevant to the discussion. He fears death because he doesn't like unimportance, and he doesn't like not being in control of his situation. And somewhat paradoxically, Dirk is afraid of existing, but every one of his splinters is afraid not to, as clearly exemplified in his conversation with the autoresponder when he almost breaks it, here in Act 6 of the comic. I do not want to die. I understand you are disgusted with me. As an unpalatable expression of yourself, I would feel the same way if I was in your situation, which I am. As such, I know you know that this is wrong. Dirk, don't kill me. Please. I'm scared. You are? Yes. I'm scared to not exist. Aren't you? In addition, we know that Dirk's classspect is the Prince of Heart. What does a Prince of Heart's qualities say about somebody with that title? Well, a Prince is an active destruction class, one who either destroys or destroys with their aspect, while a Heart player has control over emotions and the soul itself. A Prince of Heart is one who destroys emotion and the soul itself, having the power to basically destroy the emotions of others as well as their own, making them feel nothing and hollow. We see how Dirk destroys himself time and again with his own self-doubt as well as his constant inability to properly express his emotions. This Dirk destroyed himself on a narrative scale. The boundaries between himself and all of his splinters has now been wiped away, leaving one hole. In the timeline of Homestuck, the comic, what keeps our characters tethered to their very sense of selves and their actions? The Canon, right? Residing outside of Canon, they now reside outside of the confines of the story itself, just as characters. This site, which resembles a fanfiction more than it does their original universe, takes notes from fanfiction too, by putting them wherever it likes to become whoever they may as a result. Character is a concept that, in this universe, can become somewhat murky if you're trying to mold it all into one easily understandable being. Dirk could see his ultimate self. He saw it coming and he did not want to be that way. The multiple copies of Dirk he had around him all served to confirm to him how bad he thought he could be. You can see them all in Dirk, from his tendency to mess with people that's present in Hal, to his possessiveness present in Bro, to even his pedantry in Brain Ghost Dirk. Dirk before Dirk was a guy always determined to make his problems something that nobody else had to deal with. Dirk is out to make his problems everyone else's. In several metaphorical senses now, we have Dirk pegged for a direct comparison to Lord English himself, not to mention his political campaign for Jane, which seems determined to turn her into a second Condis, his seeming foresight as to being killed by Dave, and his mirroring of English's "I'm already here" as "I'm already gone" when talking to Calliope. There's also the fact that arguably he enacts this entire evil plan to continue propagating himself and his canon existence. Dirk knows that without momentum, without conflict, there is no story. And that's why the Candy epilogue ultimately falls apart at the seams, and without story, there's no canon. Without canon, there's no Dirk anymore. In some fashion, his relevance fades just as all traces of canon do, arguably. The Homestuck epilogues are a giant cherub fic, and we were given clues about this being the case from the start. Not only in how the epilogue is presented and formatted, but when we were offered a choice between meat or candy. We all know that humans can't really live on uncooked meat or candy alone. They're not sustainable. They're not exactly satisfying, but they are what cherubs eat. All they eat, in fact. Cherubs spend their lifetime alone. Cherubs only have colligonous relationships. Cherubs use trickster mode to distract themselves from their problems. The candy path of the epilogue is Calliope's unsatisfying attempt to make everyone realize their full potential, and her effort was clear. She did care, but she made everyone solitary, selfish, pseudo-parodies of themselves. Fluff with no substance. It's trickster mode, it's pixie dust, it's everyone gets married and has babies. But like Dirk said before back in the trickster mode intermission, that doesn't really solve any problems. And boy, do a lot of bad things still happen in Candy. So then what is Dirk's solution as the wielder of narrative and meat? Well, it's his glorification of the things he feared becoming. An unruly vice grip over what he fears losing. And what becomes abundantly clear looking at both narrators in this equation is that neither Calliope or Dirk trust the characters enough to simply pull back and allow them to figure it out for themselves. Remember Detective Pony, the book Dirk gave Jane for her birthday that he basically wrote by hijacking another story? This is that, all over again. Both of them are obsessed with continuing the story the way they think is best, but it was never really supposed to be about either of them. Recall this quote from Vriska back in Homestuck proper. "Nobody should control a universe. That's what bad guys try to do. We just want it to be a nice place to live and free of any controlling influence that will make life miserable for the people who live there. Having an attitude about the ultimate reward that differs from that in any way was just another thing we f***ed up the first time around. So let's just be clear on what we're fighting for here." If you take a step back and try to figure out which epilogue is the better version, you'll find that neither of them are really that good. The characters don't have much agency of their own and are often led down twisted paths that conflict with who we wanted them to be as heroes. Everything is too sobering, too real, and Dirk isn't helping matters by trying to beat Homestuck into a mold he finds worth telling a story about. Calliope's method doesn't really help either. It's just fluff without cause, redemptions for villains who never actually earned it. and a whole lot of fanfare for a whole lot of nothing. The only point at which the Candy timeline even remotely begins to resemble what we think we know is when it unravels, when Calliope is distracted by Ultidirk and goes off to deal with him. Left unattended to, their universe has a tiny light of hope. Remember what I said about the death of the author? You were probably waiting for that to come back up, huh? Well, here's where it comes into play. Toward the very end of the Candy route, we witness a conversation between Alt Calliope and Aradia about the nature of narrative voices. When asked for an example of a story, Aradia brings to the table the story of The Signless from Troll Ancestry. Calliope requests that she attempt to retell the story as briefly as possible, fine-tuning it further and further until eventually it's just a small sentence. When Calliope repeats it back, she repeats it once in her regular manner of speech, then in the font and syntax of the narrator's text. Aradia is unable to describe the subtle difference, but is able to point out that there is one. Calliope says that because she was told to pay attention for a difference, she noticed it, but if she had not been alert to the idea, she would never have noticed it at all. I brought to your attention that the story you were listening to had a speaker with a specific identity, and where there is an identity, there can also be an agenda. I gained the power to bend your consciousness to become more amenable to my narrative agenda by lulling you into a more receptive state through the established rhythm of the story's telling. This was only possible because you were not initially questioning the identity of the teller, or even considering that there was an identity to consider. A story may remain speakerless from the beginning until the end, offering no reason for its listener to ever imagine that it is of the spoken sort. It can also be spoken from the beginning, which is an upfront announcement to the listener that it carries the perspective of an individual. But a spoken story may also disguise itself as one that is speakerless, as mine just did. The speaker may reveal herself well after speakerless conditions have been established, and then one may ask, was it spoken by the individual all along while remaining masked? Or has the speaker suddenly intervened to command a heretofore speakerless tale? For as long as the hypothetical speaker of a speakerless story remains masked, then it is true that the story could be seen as either speakerless or spoken. Both are true as well as neither. It's best seen as a null factor until there's a departure. Once a hidden speaker becomes unmasked, then retroactively the story may be considered spoken all along, and so too do we retroactively change how we regard what has already been spoken. Did you catch that? A spoken story may also disguise itself as one that is speakerless. This is exactly what happens in regards to our own respective narrators, Alt Calliope and Ultidirk, before their respective reveals. Dirk has his own narrative agenda, and so does Calliope, and both of their agendas warp the events and people within to suit their desires. Barth's Death of the Author insists a disconnect between the experiences and interests of the author when it comes to interpreting their work. But here, in Inverse, we've been shown the idea of a narrative almost entirely painted and influenced by its teller. Their ideas, their feelings, their thoughts, and all for the worse. So then, what death of the author does the Homestuck Epilogues insist upon? I think it's simple, really. It's the death of a narrative teller within Homestuck's own universe. The characters are outside canon now, left in a conditional state that need only be fulfilled by John going back to knock Lord English into the black hole as he's destined to do. The other events taking place outside of canon don't really matter, but that's also why they don't particularly jive with the narrative influence, and why ultimately the agendas of their respective authors are what cripples their respective timelines. Things are messed up for our heroes in their new world, but while nothing eventful was really happening between Homestuck's end and now, it only truly went off the rails when we got the narrative back, got the canon back, got the momentum going. A story needs stakes, a story needs a villain. But what if it wasn't a story anymore? What if we didn't have stakes, didn't have a villain, wasn't an epilogue at all? Then, sure, whatever resulted might not be canon, it could only be left to our imaginations, but it would offer the characters we love much more free will and a greater opportunity to mend their mistakes, try harder, and do better than they had before. And it's true, even if they don't live in a picturesque narrative with arcs, plot, and stakes, life isn't perfect. Life railroads off to places you didn't even think it could when you least expect it to. Sometimes you drift apart from your friends. Sometimes you wake up and somebody you used to know is kind of a fascist now. For the rest of your life, something will always be popping off. Something will always be going wrong, and you're probably always going to be a little stressed out. You may not have everything figured out. You may not ever have everything figured out. But as long as you stay true to yourself, try your best, and exercise kindness, you might just find a nice timeline to live in. Whether it's canon or not, whether it's the alpha timeline or a doomed one. The journey is more important, right? So as our dueling narrators are poised to come to blows over the nature of Homestuck's canon, and we wonder to ourselves if we're ever going to get another part to this story, we can at least take one thing away from the epilogues. A narrator has an agenda. A story requires stakes. But your life doesn't have to be someone else's story. Who authors your experiences? If the answer is nobody, maybe the same should go for our heroes. These timelines were only a glimpse of many that could have happened, that could have been everything you ever dreamed of the Homestuck epilogues being. So why'd we see these? These are the result of narrative influence, and the others are outside of our reach. We can take comfort knowing that somewhere, our kids are alright, because for them, the author is dead. The only thing we can do now is wish them luck. In closing, I'd like to quote the final lines of the Mead epilogue to wrap everything up here. The whole leaves behind an absence in the sky, so calm that continuing to call it a sky wouldn't seem to do it justice. It's a perfectly neutral expanse, into which anything one can imagine might be summoned. And for a while, anything was. But not anymore. Where the whole gaped just moments ago, there now exists an imaginary line. Above this line resides all that matters. Below exists all else. Never again the twain shall meet. Hello everybody, thank you for watching my video on the Homestuck epilogues. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you haven't seen it already, I have another Homestuck essay that's about the comic proper, which you can watch. It's pretty good from what I hear, apparently. I really appreciate all of the enthusiasm and views and likes I've been getting lately. I want to keep that up. Did you agree or disagree with my interpretation of the epilogues? What did you think of the epilogues, etc., etc.? Leave your comment down below. I would love to hear from you. As always, if you'd like to support the creation of my videos, you can head over to my Patreon, where I have tier rewards and other such goodies for people that like to do the money thing. And I also am on Tumblr at NezumiVA, where you can hear little announcements about videos and behind-the-scenes stuff and all that, whatever. Also, I'm still working on the Mirai Nikki video. I'm still working on that Let's Casually Play for Castlevania. Both of those are in my project files. They're not complete, but they are steadily getting more done per day, so watch out for that soon. Anyway, with that all being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video I do. Goodbye!